Hey guys, today we're going to cover chapter 21, which is process cost accounting. This is the second of the cost accounting chapters and the final one of this class. So starting with what is process manufacturing, process cost system, it basically is the mass production of like products, and you need to know that for the test. So it produces things that look exactly alike once they are completed. Couple of characteristics that you need to understand so that you can grasp the concept of it. If you look on the illustration 21.1 on page 3, once this process gets started, it continues until the finished product emerges. And then once the finished product emerges, they all have been processed in the same manner. We assume that they use 100% exactly the same materials, labor, and overhead. So they are 100% exactly the same. You cannot tell one from the other. It's kind of like the chairs in the classrooms. If I took them out into the hallway, unless you made a mark on your chair, you would not be able to tell me which one was yours because they all look alike. Let me get to some similarities between job cost order and job or process cost system. The job cost is what we did in chapter 20, which is you complete a job and then you can calculate all of the details on the units. So how many units did you make? How much did each one cost for materials? How much did each one cost for overhead? And how much did each one cost for labor? How much is the total cost? How much is each unit individually? So you did all that on what we call job cost sheets. You tracked it all and then you add it all up. So let's talk about some things that are the same between the two. The manufacturing cost components are the same. The three cost components that we talked about, there's still direct materials, there's still direct labor, and there's still manufacturing overhead. Those are still the three cost components that we have to take into consideration. Now, the accumulation of cost, labor, and of the cost of materials, labor, and overhead are going to be the same. Materials, you're going to debit raw materials when you get them in. Labor goes to factory labor when it's incurred, and manufacturing overhead gets a debit when it's incurred. So you're going to set them up, like I said, in job order cost, the same way, but we're going to apply them differently. So they're going into WIP a little differently. The flow of costs of both systems accumulate the same way. You debit raw materials, factory labor head, and overhead, and then you assign the cost to a WIP account. Once the completed project is done, then it goes into finished goods, and then it becomes a sold good. So the process is the same. It's just accounting behind the scenes that's going to be a little bit different. And it's going to be in that middle section where we differ. Differences. The number of WIP accounts that we're going to use is going to be different. We had one in job order. It went from raw materials, factory labor, manufacturing overhead, all into one WIP account, from that one WIP account into finished goods. With the process cost, it's a little bit different because you set things up according to the different processes that it takes to manufacture that product. So you may have a step 1, a step 2, and a step 3. Well, step 1 process will have its own WIP account. Step 2 process will have its own WIP account. Step 3 process will have its own WIP account. So you will have multiple WIP accounts for each process. If you look, in this exercise or this illustration in your book, you have blending, filling, and labeling. Those are 3 different processes. So you will have a WIP for blending, a WIP for filling, and a WIP for labeling. Then it will go from labeling to finished goods. So that is a major difference, and you need to know that for the test, that WIP accounts are maintained for each production department or manufacturing process. That's why I said each one of those processes will have its own WIP account. The documentation for it. On the job order, we had a job cost sheet. That's how we documented it. That's how we figured out all the costs and kept track of everything. It's different with the process cost. The costs to the WIP accounts are going to be summarized in what we call production cost reports. You need to know for the test that those summarize both the production quantity and cost data. So it's talking about a production area, and it's going to summarize what that production area has done. Now, you also need to know for the test that total manufacturing cost per unit is going to equal unit materials cost plus, we're going to call it unit conversion cost. Conversion cost is simply labor and overhead. So you still have those three cost components, but now we're combining labor and overhead into something called conversion cost. The only one that's kept separate is materials. And the materials will be added 100% at the beginning of the process. The other two are added as it goes down the line. So those are called conversion costs. So know those things for the test, that the total manufacturing cost per unit is the materials plus the conversion costs. And then also know that conversion cost contains the labor and the overhead. The point at which costs are totaled is different also. Total costs are determined at a certain period of time rather than when a job is complete. Because if you think about it, if you're on an assembly line and you are mass producing things, there is no end to the job. It just continues and continues and continues and continues. So you have to pick a point in time to say, okay, right now is when we're going to figure out all of our details for this. So we pick a time and then we figure everything out. And we are going to use a new thing in order to measure things. It's kind of hard to explain. We'll get there in a couple of minutes. The unit cost computation is different. Unit cost is total manufacturing costs for a period divided by equivalent units produced during the period. There's the terminology that you're going to be learning in a couple minutes. Equivalent units. And we're going to be talking about that here shortly. But that is how we're going to decide part of what we're going to use to decide how much the cost is. If you look on page 6, you can see how this is going to flow. You have the three manufacturing cost components: raw materials, factory labor, and overhead, and it goes into each department. Each of them will have their own cost components added, and they will go from one department to the next department to finished goods and then to cost of goods sold. So it's kind of the same sort of flow with a lot more in the middle. Let's take a look at page 7, assigning manufacturing costs, those three cost components. Materials cost. Tyler Company adds materials at the beginning of each process. Like I said, materials will always be 100% complete. The other will not. The other two, labor and overhead, or conversion cost. Suppose at the beginning of the current period that Tyler adds $50,000 of direct materials to the machining process and $20,000 of direct materials to the assembly process. So each process, remember, has its own WIP account. These are direct materials we're talking about. Regardless, they are raw materials. So you're going to debit WIP for both of them individually. So we have a WIP for machining and a WIP for assembly. And we're going to put the respective amounts in and credit it all out of raw materials. So that's a little bit different than what we did before. When we put raw materials in the process, we only had one WIP account. Now you have one for each process. If there were more than two processes, you would have more than two WIP accounts. So each one has its own. And materials, like I said, are 100% added at the beginning of the process. The factory labor. Suppose that Tyler Company incurs factory labor charges of $20,000 in the machining process and $13,000 in the assembly process. Going to do the same thing. Going to put it in work in process machining, work in process assembly, and all of that would come to $33,000 out of factory labor. So when you set up the factory labor cost component, you would have debited factory labor because here you're going to credit it out. Again, it's the same concept. You have to get rid of that factory labor in this entry. Manufacturing overhead. The objective to assigning this is to allocate the overhead during the process. So we're going to take a look at each process and we're going to say what drives that process. So you want to know what makes this process tick. A lot of times with the automation industry coming in as much as it has, you will find machines replacing people. So know for the test that the most commonly used these days, driver-wise, is machine hours. That because machines are, like I said, being used to replace people in a lot of situations, and they are doing it very efficiently. So a lot of times your driver will be machine hours. It can be labor hours, direct labor hours. It can be direct labor dollars, just kind of like what we did before. You want to take a look at what drives it. What makes this work? So in this case, we're going to assume that Tyler uses machine hours, and they are going to assign $45,000 to the machining process and $17,000 to the assembly, regardless of where it is going in WIP, to machining or assembly. It's overhead. So you're applying that overhead to the process again, using that driver. Then this is a little different. You're going to transfer things to the next department. So if you're transferring it from machining to assembly, because that's the order, we're going to go through machining and then into assembly, then you would take all of the cost of the stuff that's moving out of machining and put it in WIP assembly. So taking a look here, when work in process items have received all the necessary inputs from one department, they progress to the next department, going down that line. In our example, Tyler Company needs an entry to record the cost of goods transferred out of machining and into assembly. In this case, it transfers to the assembly department. Suppose Tyler transfers goods with a recorded cost of $87,000 from machining to assembly. You would just simply take it out of machining with a credit, put it into assembly with a debit. Both of them would be WIP accounts like it shows there on page 8. Now, once they're done, then they would go from the final department, assembly, to finished goods, just like we did before, WIP to finished goods, only you are a specific process going to finished goods now. So in this case, they have completed $114,000 worth of product, so you would debit the finished goods and credit WIP assembly. Same thing for the sale. You're going to have those two entries. You're going to debit accounts receivable or cash and sales for the selling price of that product, and debit cost of goods sold, credit finished goods for the cost of the product, just like we have in the former chapter. So let's get into, we mentioned equivalent units. So as you can see, by the way, a lot of these journal entry things are the same. So I guess before we get into equivalent units, let's go back and take a look at some exercises so that we can kind of jump in and get our feet wet again. We're going to go back to brief exercise 2.1 on page 33. Warner Company purchases $50,000 of materials, raw materials on account. It incurred $60,000 worth of factory labor. We're going to record these, set them up, is what I used term-wise in chapter 20, the same way. What did we get? Well, we got raw materials. $50,000. And we got them on account. So accounts payable, $50,000. And then we have factory labor that we need to record. So we're going to debit factory labor, just like we did before for the $60,000. And credit, we said factory wages payable or payroll liabilities, either one. So that is setting those two up. Next thing we'll do then is put them in the process, but they will go into the process that they belong in, because each department will have its own. Let's look at number 2. Data for Warner Company are given in 21-1. Supporting records show that the assembly department used $24,000 of direct materials and $35,000 worth of direct labor, and the finishing department used the remainder. So we're going to put these things into their particular process. First thing we're going to do is put the labor or the raw materials in. Whip assembly has its own. And they used $24,000. Now in this case in the book, we are assuming that they're using all $50,000 of raw materials because they didn't give us another number for a total. So we're going to assume that they're using all of this. So all of the raw materials are being put out. And the other one is finishing. So you have $50,000 total, $24,000 being gone to the assembly. The remaining $26,000 is what has gone to finishing. So that is putting materials into the two processes. Factory labor, going to do the same thing. Going to go part of it into whip assembly. Part of it into whip finishing. Regardless, it's factory labor. And remember, the intention of this one is to get rid of this. So you're definitely going to assign $60,000 worth, and 35 of it has gone to assembly, which means the remaining 25 is what has gone to finishing. Number 3 says direct labor data for Warner Company is given in 21-2. Okay. Manufacturing overhead is assigned to departments on the basis of 160% of direct labor cost. We're going to journalize it for applying manufacturing overhead to both processes using a driver of direct labor cost. So kind of like, I guess, look at being the driver as what we call predetermined overhead before. So it's kind of like using the same concept. So we want to take and put manufacturing overhead into these two processes. So again, you're going to be debiting whip, assembly, and whip finishing. Regardless of which one you're going to put it in, it is manufacturing overhead. Now this is applied overhead, just like it was before. It's 160% of their direct labor numbers, which are these two right here. So if you take 160% times 35, you would get 56. If you take 160% times 25, you get 40. So we are going to apply $96,000 worth of overhead to the two departments. So it's so far pretty much the same as what we've done before. So now we're going to get into the new terminology called equivalent units. This one is, I don't want to say a little tricky, but it's definitely a little different than what we've done. So let's take a look at it. Know for the test that equivalent units is going to measure the work done during the period, but it's going to express it in completed terms. Now, if you are on an assembly line, is it ever completed? Does it ever stop? No. So that's why we have to do this equivalent units calculation, which basically means I am going to take all of this stuff that's on this assembly line that is in pieces. Down here, it's just getting started, so it's not even looking like hardly anything at all. The further it gets down the line, the more complete it gets, the more it looks like the final product. Well, I'm going to take all of that stuff and I'm going to mush it all together, and I'm going to say, okay, if I mush it all together, how many total units would that make me? And that's what we call equivalent units. So basically, you will be given a percentage of completion of the work in process, and you're going to use that percentage of completion to find out what you're going to call equivalent units. So you're going to take that percentage complete and multiply it times your physical units, and that will give you your percentage complete. So say, for example, we have 100 units, physical units out there that are 50% complete. Well, if you take 50% of 100, you've got 50 equivalent units. It's the same concept that you're going to use. So you take the percentage complete times the physical units that are out there. So let's take a look at a couple of examples in the book. Example 1, example 2, about 2/3 of the way down on page 10. In a specific period, the entire population efforts of Sullivan Company's blending department resulted in an ending work in process of 4,000. Wait a minute. I don't want to go there yet. That's weighted average. I want to go up to the top. Sorry. So right below the yellow, part-time students take 60% of the classes of full-time students during the year. We're going to, got to start on the next page. Sorry, I'll get it together. Page 9. Suppose you have a work-study job in the office of your college president, and she asks you to compute the cost of instruction per full-time equivalent student at your college. The college's vice president for finance provides the following information. So the yellow is what the vice president of finance has given you. The president wants to know, compute the cost of instruction per full-time equivalent student. So we've got part-time students. Okay, well, we need to know how many equivalent full-time students they are. So you've got information here in the yellow. Part-time students take 60% of the classes of full-time students during the year. So you're going to take physical number of full-time students, 900. Then you're going to add to that the equivalent units that the part-time students make for full-time. So you've got 1,000 part-time units. They take 60% of the classes as of full-time. So you would multiply those two and come up with 600 equivalent full-time students. So 1,000 times 60% is 600, plus the 900 actual full-time. You have 1,500 full-time equivalent students then. And by then you can take that, the 9,000 divided by the 1,500 and come up with 6,000. So that is how you would solve that for the president. So we're going to be looking for equivalent full-time units. So again, you're going to take the physical units that are out there. In this case, we had 1,000 students, multiply it by your percentage, which is 60, and got the 600 equivalent. So if I took 1,000 part-time students and I mushed them all together, I would have 600 full-time students instead. That's basically what you're doing with the units on the assembly line. Let's take a look at some examples. Going back to page 33, number 4. And a lot of this is going to feel like repetition, and it kind of is. Just hang in there. All right, number 4 says, Goody Company has the following production data for selected months. Compute equivalent units of production for materials and conversion costs, assuming that materials are entered at the beginning of the process, and that's 100% entered at the beginning of the process. The conversion costs are incurred uniformly through the process. So, looking at the month of January. Okay, we want to take a look at units that are transferred out, and then the ones in ending work in process. We want to take a look at units for conversion cost and materials. Okay? Remember, those are the three cost components all put together: materials, factory labor, and overhead. Okay? So in January, it says we didn't have any in beginning work in process. We transferred out 35,000 units. The rest of that table is all ending work in process. So that's going to be in here. We want to just take a look at transferred out. Well, let's think about this. If it's transferred out, then it's going into finished goods. So how complete are these 35,000 units for materials? Well, materials are 100% added at the beginning, so they are 100% complete all the time for materials. So I definitely have 35,000 units for my materials side. Now, if they are complete and transferring out, then they're complete. They're not only complete for materials, but they're also complete for these because they're done. So I have 35,000 also complete for conversion cost. Now on the materials side, that's when it gets a little different. On the materials side, it says we have, or on the ending work in process side, we have 10,000 units. Now, if we add materials at the beginning of the process, 100%, how complete are those 10,000 units for materials? You can't get any more complete than 100% in this. So these 10,000 units are 100% complete for materials. Now, if you look at the last part, it says they are 40% complete for conversion cost. So I would take the 40% times the 10,000 and come up with 4,000 equivalent units for my conversion cost. So then I would add up the conversion cost units are 39 equivalent units and materials are 360. No, hold on, I can't add. How about 45? There we go. Take a look at March. Same sort of process. Transferred out is easy. Ending work in process takes a little work. For March, we had 0 in beginning, 40,000 completed and transferred out. That means the transferred out is 40,000 for both. Then it says we have 8,000 physical units in ending work in process. All 8,000 are 100% complete for materials. But they are only 75% complete for conversion cost. So I would take 75% times the 8,000 and get 6,000. So my equivalent units for conversion cost is 46,000. Not going to do the next one. Get this idea. It's the same thing. Okay. Let's take a look at number 5. The smelting department of Kiner Company has the following production data for November. Beginning work in process is 2,000 units that are 100% complete for materials and 20% complete for conversion costs. Units completed and transferred out are 9,000 units. And ending work in process is 7,000 units that are 100% complete for materials and 40% to conversion. Compute the equivalent units of production for materials and conversion costs for the month of November. So we're basically doing the same thing, only different data. And we are now in a month of November. Okay. Transferred out units. We have 9,000 transferred out. They are 100% complete. Okay. Now another way that you can do this, because sometimes I just like to see it differently, is I separate out materials and conversion, or you can just leave it in the chart. If I do, I say materials and conversion cost, and then I tell me what I've got. Okay, for the ending work in process, we have 7,000 units. They are 100% complete for materials. So I have 7,000 here. But here I'm going to say, okay, I have 7,000 times 75%, and that is going to give me, this is an old book. Is it 75? 40, sorry. Good, same number. So 7,000 times 40% is 2,800. Again, it's just, do you want to keep the ending work in process on the same line, or do you want to split it out? Either one is fine. So 9,000 plus 7,000 is going to give me 16,000. Oops, sorry. Rewrite that. And the 9,000 plus the 2,000 gives me 11,800 for equivalent conversion cost. Okay, so this is how we're going to come up with our number of units. These are done, 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 okay? Ending work in process is always the same, done, done, done for materials, but a percentage for conversion, okay? Let's take a look at number 6. In Mordecai Company, total materials cost is $33,000. Total conversion costs are $54,000 for June. Equivalent units of production are materials 10,000 and conversion costs 12,000. So now you're just going to simply compute how much is my unit cost for materials and how much is my unit cost for conversion cost. This is probably the easiest thing because they gave you all the information, but you're going to follow the same thing once you compute it. So for materials, let's take a look at that first. We have a total cost of $33,000, and we have total equivalent units of production for materials of 10,000. So if I take the 33,000, divide it by the 10,000 equivalent units for materials, I would get $3.30 is going into each product for materials. Now you want to take a look at the other two cost components, the material or the labor and the overhead, and that is called now conversion cost. That total is $54,000. And we have total equivalent units for conversion costs of 12,000. If you do that math, you come out to $4.50 per unit for labor and overhead or conversion cost. If you add those two together, that is my total unit cost. That's all three cost components put together. So that would be my total unit cost. My cost for my materials for each one of them will be $3.30. My cost for each one of them for the conversion cost is $4.50, making each unit costing me $7.80. Now you can take that number and go back to your transferred out, and this is what you would multiply to come up with your dollar amount that you're transferring out. Let's take a look at how that's going to work. So let's look at 7. Trek Company has the following production data for April. Units completed and transferred out are 40,000. Ending work in process units are 5,000 that are 100% complete for materials, 40% complete for conversion cost. If unit materials cost is 4, unit conversion cost is 7, then we're going to compute the cost. Let's take a look at what we have here again. We have units that are transferred out. And those number of units is 40,000. Let me make sure nothing has changed here. 40,000, 5,000, 4 and 7, and 40. Okay, we're good. So transferred out units is 40,000. Now for transferred out, you need to know how much each unit total cost is. Well, if the materials are $4 per unit and the conversion cost is $7 per unit, then each total unit costs you $11. So 40,000 times 11 is $440,000. That is what's going from the last process to finished goods. They're done and completed and transferring out. Then you have what's left in the process, ending WIP. You have two different equivalent units because you have materials and you have conversion costs that are making up the eventual total. So for materials, you have 5,000 units. And at materials cost, that is $4 of the 11. So 5,000 times 4 is 20,000. The conversion cost, we still have 5,000 units, but those 5,000 are only 40% complete. So you would have to do that math first, then multiply that by the $7 cost for conversion. So I would have 2,000 units times the 7, or 14,000. So my ending work in process is 34,000. The amount that I want to transfer out is 440. All right. We can take a look at 8. Make sure I'm good on numbers. 12, 29, 5, 18. Yep. Okay, so we're going to actually now look at computing the unit cost. Production costs of the finishing department in June in Holland's company are materials 12,000, labor 29,500, and overhead 18,000. Equivalent units of production for materials are 20,000. Conversion costs are 19. So we're going to compute the unit costs for them. So let's take a look at our calculating our total costs first. Materials and conversion costs are the ones that we want to take a look at. So for our materials, it said that we have 12,000 total. It's just giving us that number. But conversion costs, remember, are made up of two things, labor and overhead, and they gave them to me separate, so I have to do some math here. So this labor is 29,500 and the overhead is 18. So my total conversion cost is 47,500. So now I have the cost of my materials, the cost of my conversion costs. Now they also told me how many equivalent units I have for both. So again, we're just doing some math, different ways to come up with this. Unit cost for materials. I would take my total spent and divide it by my equivalent units for materials cost. And it said my equivalent units of production for materials is 20,000. And that would give me 60 cents per unit. The unit cost for conversion cost then I'm going to take the 47,500 and divide that by my equivalent units of production for conversion costs, which they said was 19, and get $2.50 per unit. If you add them together, your total unit cost is $3.10. So just a couple of different ways there that we might have to work to come up with the unit cost. But in the end, we're coming up with each unit costing me 60 cents per unit per materials and $2.50 for the rest of the other costs, the conversion costs. And number 9 is a lot like number 7. So I think we're good. I want to make sure, let me put a chart up here that we used earlier, because I want to show you how to work something, because it's going to become very important for you on the extra review and the test, because you'll have something like that on the test. So I want to set this up, transferred out, and ending what? Okay, now we're going to separate out the materials and the conversion cost. Okay, we have physical units, and equivalent. It's basically what we did before, only we had materials and conversion costs across the top and things, the equivalents and stuff down this way. So let's take a look. Let's say we have 9,000 here. Okay, you know that. You have the number of equivalent units for conversion costs, let's say, is 28. And I'm going to give you a percentage complete of 40%. Okay? And you are going to fill in the rest of this chart. Not much to go with. However, we know that if they're transferred out, my equivalent units are going to be the same as my physical units, okay? For materials and conversion cost, okay? They're going to still be 9,000. I'm going to move this over just a hair. Okay. Now, if I know that I have $2,800 worth of equivalent conversion cost units that are 40% completed, then I can do a little bit of math, because what I want to fill in is the total number of physical units here. I want to total up the number of units here, the number of units here. Sorry, not there. And then the totals. That's what those are. So, in order to know the number here, what did I have to do? Well, I had to take the physical number of units here, multiply it by 40%, and I got this. So I only have one thing that's not known, so I can solve for this. So let's solve for this. So number physical units times 40% equals 2,800. Okay. Well, if I want to get just this on this side, then I do the opposite of what's here. So I would divide this whole side by 40%. Divide this whole side by 40%. This gets canceled out, and I have physical units equals 2,800 divided by 40%. If you do that math, you will come up with 7,000. So if I have 7,000 physical units in ending work in process, and they are 100% every time for materials, then I also have 7,000 units here. Now I can do the math down. 9 plus 7 is 16. And 9 plus 28 is 11.8. We just worked exercise 21.5, brief exercise 21.5 that we worked earlier. The way you're going to be working it in your extra review and your test. So you will know this number and this number, and you have to fill the rest in. Transferred out just transfers these numbers over. They are done 100%, so they're not going to change the number. In order to get to here, I would have to take that number times that to get this. So we do this math, and that will give you this number. Well, they're always 100% complete for materials, so that's also my equivalent materials. Then do your math down. Hopefully, with this little bit of a review, not too difficult for you. All right, so wanted to make sure you understood how to do that because like I said, it is in the extra review and it is on your test. Let's take a look at Kellogg's example in the book. Starting on page 13. I believe, yes. The production cost report. Know for the test that production cost report is the summary of both production quantity and cost data for production department. So each production department will have its own production cost report. You can see that on page 13. Mixing department has its production cost report. Baking has its. Freezing and packaging has its production cost report. The production cost report for mixing won't tell you anything about baking, and it won't tell you anything about freezing and packaging. Only mixing. Same thing for the other two departments. So they are going to tell about their particular department. Now, you will not be doing a production cost report, but I do want you to know the 4 steps to complete one, which is on the bottom of page 13. 1, 2, 3, 4. Complete the physical unit flow, compute equivalent units of production, compute unit production costs, and then prepare the cost reconciliation schedule. What that does is it's going to show the total costs accounted for equal the total costs to be accounted for. So when you calculate up the amount that you have to account for, then we're going to show where it's gone. So know those 4 steps at the bottom of page 13. So now I wanted to show you how that's going to work. So if you go to page 17, there's a production cost report. You're going to, at the top, see where they are figuring out what is to, where, as far as units go, where they are, what are my physical units, what are my equivalent units, and so forth. Okay, and then you have units to account for. So you have 900,000 units that need to be accounted for. You have 700,000 that are transferred out, 200 that are still in work in process, if you are following down, okay? Then you have to compute out your equivalent units because you're going to need that for the unit cost. So for materials, like I said, it's going to be whatever your total units are, 900,000, just like it was a second ago. But your conversion cost is only 60% complete for the work in process. So you have 200,000 units, multiply that by your 60% and you get 120. Add that to the 700,000 that are transferred out. So for a conversion cost, we have 820 to be accounted for. Then we're going to calculate the unit cost for materials and conversion, just like we did before. Materials total cost is $450,000. My equivalent units for materials is the 900. Multiply that out, you get 50 cents per unit. My total conversion cost is 205. Now you don't do that by the 900,000. You go back up to the second step, the one in the middle there, and grab your 820 because that's your equivalent units for conversion cost and get 25 cents. So your total cost is going to be 75 cents per unit. Okay. So then you're going to take a look at the cost to be accounted for. My beginning work in process, it says, is $85,000. We've started $570,000 into production. So we have to account for $655,000. I am going to then look at how many units are transferred out. I have 700,000 that are transferred out, and they are total cost units, 75 cents. That gives me 525,000 of the 655. I have 200 physical units that are 100% complete for materials. Multiply that by my materials cost. That's 100,000 more that's accounted for. My conversion cost, I've got 120,000 equivalent units. Multiply that times the 25-cent conversion cost amount, that gives me 30. If I add the 525,000 plus the 130,000, there's my 655,000 to account for. And they are accounted for. So this basically walks you through all the pieces that we've done up here, but puts it all in a report. So like I said, you will not be doing a production cost report. Just know the 4 steps to get there. Some final comments here is that some companies use a combination of job order cost and process cost called operations costing. Like process cost is going to use standardized methods that are going to manufacture products, but because of some customized individual features, it can also require the use of some job order cost system details as well. Total manufacturing cost per unit, again, don't forget, is materials cost plus the conversion cost. And conversion costs are going to be those other 2 cost components, factory labor and manufacturing overhead. So there's just a few homework exercises to do. Make note that on exercise 21-2 that you journalize all WIP entries. So make sure that you've done that. So just a couple exercises and 1 problem. And then your extra review will be for you on Moodle. And if you have any questions, let me know. Make sure you print off the group work when we're getting ready to discuss this chapter. Talk to you soon. Good luck.